Immigrations and Customs Enforcement is set to begin removing illegal immigrants from the country, and today President Trump officially kicks off his re-election campaign.
So Team Rising is here. Roger Fisk is a Democratic strategist. He's an Obama administration alum and former senior aide of communication and policy for Senator John Kerry. Holly Turner is a Republican strategist. She spent 1 year working for the Trump White House and the U.S. Small Business Administration. Welcome to you both.
Lady and Jen, how are we feeling about these new giant mugs that we have?
It's big news. Probably the biggest news of the morning.
First topic of debate, how do you feel about the new Rising mug? Okay,
I'm a huge fan, but my name's on it. But
True, we're a little biased.
Holly, the president came out last night. He said we're going to have large roundups. We don't have any details on what the supposed roundups and the deportation is. Is this just something to preview the campaign event that's later today, or do you think it's a substantive policy thing? Because I've seen him promise a lot of different things on immigration that haven't necessarily come to fruit. Things I would like to see, by the way, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, well, I think it's definitely something he wants to see happen. We don't normally see this telegraphed movement happen whenever there's a roundup or some sort of law enforcement action, but it is a nationwide effort that he's talking about, so it may be that it's just not possible to keep that under wraps. And there are a lot of components to making this happen, a lot of different jurisdictions to coordinate with, a lot of different agencies to coordinate with, so we don't have the specifics yet, but I do think that, he wants it to happen. Maybe there is going to be a little bit more pressure on those local agencies to do some of this, but we'll see.
How do you think the candidates are going to respond, Roger, too? Because, this isn't necessarily people who have been in the country for a long time. As I understand it, and this is because we're light on the policy details here, this is largely people who didn't show up to their asylum hearings and are eligible for deportation under any administration.
Right. First off, thanks so much for having me, and it's great to be here with Holly. It'll be very interesting to see how long the agricultural community puts up with a lot of this. I have family in Alabama. They passed one of the strictest immigration laws in the country, and within 12 months there was produce in the fields going unpicked, uncollected, and then they finally cried uncle and then kind of went back and said, all right, we went a little too far. This is piling on top of what the Chinese tariff situation is doing to the soybean farmers and a whole bunch of other folks. So how long these folks will put up with this of having crops rot in the field is probably the most compelling question when I look at this. To echo a little bit of Holly's points on the kind of process thing, it still amazes me that he literally regards Twitter as like a real thing. Like when he rescinded the idea of sanctions against Mexico and tried to use this kind of semi-formal sound, I hereby declare that we will not, he thinks it's like a thing when it's actually just atmospheric. It doesn't exist. It's just wind. It's just air. So my point in that is that we will see once this actually takes shape, and once we see vans or buses actually rolling up to a meat processing plant in Iowa, we won't really know what this is going to look like as an actual policy.
Well, and Holly, that is one of the things is a lot of people like this in like an idea form, but then when it's their town and it's somebody that they know that is part of their community, then it starts to look very different when you have actual stories of dad was sent back and kids are still here or whatever the situation is. It plays a lot differently than it does in a theoretical tweet.
Right, but the law is the law, and I think in the end people want there to be rules and they want the rules to be followed. That's universal across parties. What are the rules? If the rules are broken right now, which I think both sides would agree that the rules are broken, the law is broken, that's on Congress. They've got to fix this. And to your point about the agricultural businesses, do we need more visas? Do we need more of let's deal with that, but let's do it the right way. It can't just be a free-for-all. We have to secure our borders, and in the end there are going to be some sad stories, but we have to secure our borders and then make allowances for those people that deserve to be here to be here.
Just one,
please. Sure.
One of the untold stories, one of the things that escapes kind of moral scrutiny in all this is the fact that jobs are not taken away by immigrants. Jobs are given away by American bosses. An American boss looks at someone that they would have to pay $25 in benefits to per hour or whatever, and they look at someone that they can pay $7 an hour under the table, and they go with the $7 under the table. There's virtually no moral conversation about that. So this whole idea that jobs are taken Jobs are given away.
I agree.
And it's Americans making those decisions. So we need to be very sober about when we say people are breaking the laws. They're responding to the magnetic pull of an economy that is basically depending on illegal immigration.
And not only
I couldn't agree more.
but American consumers are also habituated to paying very low prices for things.
Right, so
And
we shouldn't demonize immigrants, we should demonize the employers.
They're
Because
not,
the
they're not
employers
prepared to
are the
pay
right.
what it would cost to have a tomato that was picked by an American with those $25 worth of benefits, et cetera.
Right, and then additionally, in the policy context, when the president came out about 6 weeks ago with kind of the broad strokes of his vision of immigration reform, one of the central tenets of it was that they were going to focus on more skill-based visas, right? Which is then taking a bigger bite higher up the economic chain than what's currently happening. Because right now, it's farm workers, it's restaurants, it's construction sites, et cetera. If you start to predicate those visas, those foreign worker visas, on having a college degree, then all of a sudden then it's chemical engineers from abroad that are being chosen over Americans. And then that starts to eat into the folks making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. That becomes a much different challenge. And my point of a few moments ago about the moral scrutiny that American bosses are not receiving, that may be the thing that triggers people to finally take a look at that.
Well, Holly,
Yeah, you couldn't be more right there, Roger, which is that the focus should actually be on the employers themselves. That's why mandatory E-Verify would do much more to solve any of this problem than any immigration. You can pass the most restrictive immigration law in the country. If an employer is not going to face penalty for employing an illegal immigrant, they're going to do it every time. Because that's one of the things, one of the great benefits of this is that the agricultural industry has had to admit to the American people, A, that they're wholesale in the tank for China because they need China in order to buy its goods, and B, that they're completely reliant on illegal immigrant labor. Whether it's about they need to define themselves either as an American or an international business.
But that's what they have to do under the current system to compete. Because if you had one farm, one producer that was using American labor and paying what it would take to do that, there's no way they would be competitive. But I mean, Holly, the other piece that we're learning here, and I think this was another Twitter pronouncement that apparently is becoming real, is we're going to cut aid to the Northern Triangle countries where most of these immigrants are coming from, because while part of the motivation for coming here is obviously economic, part of it is also, violence in these home countries. Part of it is also the fact that there's very little, you basically can't survive in a lot of places in these home countries. It seems unbelievably foolhardy and counterproductive to cut this aid.
Well, first of all, the aid's not going to be cut immediately. So what we've promised through this next fiscal year is going to be delivered as promised. But it does give us some time to say, you need to get your act together, countries who—
It's leverage, right?
It is leverage. I mean, if you've not read Art of the Deal, then you really shouldn't have an opinion on the president, in my opinion.
Has he read Art of the Deal? Real question.
Wait, if you'd read it,
Real question.
If you read the book, you would know it was like exactly written by him.
Yeah,
it's like a long tweet. It's a long tweet from the president. It is, but that is him.
It was ghostwritten anyway.
No, but
What's it, 24?
oh my gosh.
The idea of it.
Okay.
The idea of it.
The idea.
I'm not even.
Anyway, we're not going to fight over Art of the Deal.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is leverage. It's not for sure going to happen. We're just, why are we giving this money? I mean, this is my money. This is your money. This is all of our money that we work hard for. What are they doing with it? And if they're not putting it to, if it's being used for corrupt purposes, we shouldn't be giving it to them. And so I think we're just asking for some accountability. If they deliver on that, then they get the money.
Roger.
At the end of the rainbow here is the fact that the president prefers having this as an issue, and actually I don't think is invested in solving it. The idea of putting tariffs on Mexico, that was his main point of 2 or 3 weeks ago, you could basically call the Let's Increase Illegal Immigration Act of 2019, right? If you strangle Mexico, that by definition is going to increase the number of people that want out of there. And the same thing in Honduras and et cetera. We have a very checkered past and with a lot of warts and wrinkles and flaws in Central and South America, specifically through the 50s, 60s, 70s. So a decent amount of those problems down there have to do, or at least our fingerprints are on some of them. We were picking and choosing regimes, we were toppling people, et cetera, on through most of the countries in South or Central America for quite a long time. Those chickens are somewhat coming home to roost, very similar to Iran. We created the Shah of Iran. We fomented that that coup. So it's unfortunate that these things come around, but I don't think that the president actually is looking at this in a policy context, similar to almost every issue that he gets involved in, where it's more about scratching the itch of grievance and conspiracy and fear than it is a sober policy discussion about what to do with our borders. Say, for example, he never mentions our ports, which when you look at some of the challenges with drugs and things like that, are actually far more vulnerable than the southern border. But all that real estate in a policy conversation just goes completely unexamined.
So, Roger, you open us up perfectly to talk about politics. Trump is kicking off his reelection campaign today down in Florida. And we just took a look back at his approval ratings right before he got elected in 2016 versus today, if we can throw that up. Back at the time, his approval rating was only 38% favorable. Now it's 43%. So you look at the numbers and you say, oh, he's not doing that well. You look at the polls, you say in the head-to-head matchups with Biden, he's losing, even according to his own internal campaign metrics. But people didn't like him that much when they elected him in the first place.
Which is why they had to hire extras to populate their crowd. If you go through his FEC filing, they subcontracted out to an organization called Gotham Government Relations in New York, who subcontracted out to a thing called Extra Mile Casting, which put out a casting call and paid people $50 to show up for 3 hours. They're all the folks in the white t-shirts. And people are going through now and finding these kind of bit player actors and actresses that were there to make this money. So there was a certain fundamental fraudulence in the very day that he introduced his candidacy. I'm not saying that he needs to do that this time around, but it'll be interesting to see how and whether or not he can grow. Right? I mean, that's the challenge for him right now. And there's about 4 parts of the country where it's going to come down to. Can he grow amongst, married women with college educations in suburban Philadelphia? Clearly, 35% of the country is going to be with him. He can say 2 + 2 is 5, and 35% of the country will put their hand over a Bible and say that it's 5. The question is can he grow? Can he get that margin to up even to the high 40s in terms of the electorate? And that's really their challenge. But similar to our conversation about immigration and things like that, I don't see, and I look across the first 2 years of the administration, almost any indication of them reaching out to the center. It's constant red meat to the base. And I think if he needs to grow and get to that point where he can get over to 50, 51%, or maybe less if there's a third-party challenge, he could probably win with 44.
Or he lost the popular vote last time, so doesn't have to get over.
Well, he doesn't need to win.
We're playing by the rules that are there. If you want to play by different set of rules, then we'll play.
I'm just pointing out he doesn't have to get to 50%.
But you cannot say that he's not playing to the center when it's the most extensive deregulation activity of any administration. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I mean, that is for the center. This is for normal Americans who don't care about fringe issues. He has done more for that group of people in the middle. And so to say that he's only playing to the fringe is not, an accurate assessment.
If he wins, it will be because of that. But I think, and this is what I want to get into, is what is the actual message? Because it used to be, I'm going to derail the establishment. Now you are the establishment. And now, in the eyes of many people, I know and many other people know that pretty much most of the U.S. federal government apparatus is united against him.
Right.
But how does he convey that in a message tonight in Florida whenever he tells them, I'm going to be coming up against the forces of Washington? I agree with him that the forces of Washington remain united against him and are far more powerful than anybody ever estimated. But what's the way that is conveyed to the crowd when they say, you hold the presidency of the United States?
Yeah, so there's this interesting psychology behind having a leader and people who kind of agree philosophically with what is trying to happen. When you are not successful, it kind of solidifies your base even more. So every time that the president has attempted to do something and the Ninth Circuit has struck it down or Congress has rejected it, every time he tries something that he's promised that he's going to try to get done and he's defeated, it just reinforces even more that he's not establishment. So I think what we have is 2 years of him just proving over and over and over again that he's not the establishment. I mean, it's crazy, but if everybody just said, okay, then he would seem like he was more of the swamp.
I mean, it's an interesting point that Holly's making. I don't think she's necessarily wrong, but basically, if he gets something accomplished and he's like, we're winning, and if he doesn't, it's we got to keep going, right? I mean, it's like he wins either way, right? Because he gets to have the grievance when it gets struck down by the courts or when Democrats stay in opposition.
I mean, I can't be the only one that notices that he's somehow able to position himself as both the victim and the champion in virtually every situation. And I'll leave that to smarter folks than me. I made myself a promise, which is I'm going to go straight at this deregulation stuff whenever it comes up, because I think there's a whole bunch of things there that are not good stories. They've pulled back the restrictions on dumping coal mine runoff into the rivers of West Virginia and Kentucky. The Obama administration put in credit protections for active military to protect them from payday lenders. Those have been now removed, so it's open season on active military. You can now hunt hibernating bears. A lot of those deregulation things that are touted as the job creation stuff, I think there's a lot more there that's worthy of scrutiny. And then finally, on the economic front, the last couple months have a very strong sleeper narrative that I don't think the Trump folks are going to welcome. February was 40,000 jobs created, which is pathetic by any measurement. March was the largest single month of growth in our budget deficit of $234 billion. And then most recently in May was job growth of 70,000 jobs, which is way below. That's half of what we need to create just to keep pace with inflation. So when you dig in just past these talking points a little bit, there's some really bad narratives there for this administration.
Well, we can get into that another time.
Tell that story. Yeah. Holly and Roger, two smart individuals. Great to have you both at the table. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Coming up, is it the town that time forgot? In this case, it is the town that wants to forget time, apparently. We're going to tell you about a unique place in Scandinavia.
And new developments in the mystery of Malaysian airline flight MH370. That story when Rising continues.